In the summer of 1904, New York City buzzed with scandal. Millionaire John Platt accused Hannah Elias, a reclusive black woman with a shadowy past, of blackmailing him out of $685,000, nearly $30 million today. This made Elias arguably the richest and most infamous black woman in America. Join me as we explore her story. Hannah Elias' exact date of birth is unknown, but she was born in Philadelphia in 1865, the year the American Civil War ended. Her father was Charles Elias, a cook and caterer who was married to Mary Elias. Charles was of mixed African American and Native American heritage, and Hannah's mother Mary was also quite light-skinned. This resulted in Hannah having a lighter skin tone, something which played a role in her later life, as we will see. Hannah grew up in a very large household. She was one of her parents' 9 children. They lived in what was then considered to be the wealthiest neighborhood in the city for African Americans, although the sheer size of their family meant that, even though Charles made a good living, they were hardly rich. Still, the family was well regarded and was steadily climbing the socio-economic ladder. Charles eventually moved them to a larger house where they lived in an area alongside Philadelphia's lawyers and leading black businessmen. She and her siblings went to a public school and they received a decent education. Beyond this, we don't know an awful lot about Hannah's upbringing. It was not until her sister Hattie's wedding was held in 1884, when Hannah was about 19 years old, that her story really begins. Prior to the wedding, Hannah had started working in the home of a wealthy woman from the northern part of Philadelphia. It would later be discovered that prior to her sister's wedding, Hannah had decided to quote-unquote borrow an expensive dress from her employer's wardrobe. At Hattie's wedding, many commented on how elaborate and fine Hannah's dress was. She was, to quote one attendee, the belle of the evening. Things didn't end there though. Perhaps Hannah intended to return the dress to where she had taken it from, and had hoped that her actions would simply go completely unnoticed. However, a few days later, before she had returned to work, police officers showed up at the Elias residence and arrested Hannah. Her employer had noticed that the dress was missing and realized it must have been Hannah who took it. These were times in which African Americans didn't exactly have an extended form of due process in America if they were suspected of committing a crime against a white person. That same evening, Hannah was quickly taken before a court and was found guilty of theft. She was sentenced to 4 months in Moyamensing Prison in Philadelphia. There she was confined in a section with about 40 other women. The rest of the prison was populated by men, many of them in there for violent, unspeakable crimes. She would serve the full 4 months of her sentence here, and it was now that her life would take a dark turn. Hannah's early brush with crime shaped the rest of her life. When she completed her sentence and tried to return home, her father wouldn't let her live with the rest of the family anymore. Penniless and without a place to live, she drifted north to New York. There she quickly began providing for herself in the only way she could think of on short notice. She became a prostitute. This was in the Tenderloin district of the city, a part of New York that had many hotels, and where ladies of pleasure congregated at night. It was not an easy start here for Hannah. She became pregnant in 1885 and gave birth to a daughter named Clara at the start of 1886, who she put up for adoption. Not long afterwards she was sent before the courts for prostitution and was sentenced to a month in prison on Roosevelt Island in the East River. Hannah got out before long, and she quickly became savvier about how she conducted her affairs. She also started to claim that she was Cuban on account of her lighter skin tone. Soon, Hannah was earning enough to rent a place and to survive. She would continue in this vein for many years to come. She became so successful that she began to acquire a lot of extra money and bought up properties that she rented out to complement what she was earning. Many of these were in uptown Manhattan, north of Central Park around the edge of what is now Harlem. This wasn't an African American community yet, and many old New York families still lived in what had originally been founded as a Dutch settlement way back in the 17th century. Hannah split her time between a Manhattan residence and a lavish beach house she owned in Far Rockaway, near Atlantic Beach on Long Island, though still within the borough of Queens. By the early 1900s, she lived in luxury, attended by a maid, a butler, and a full household staff. But whispers about her fortune were growing louder, and soon, the truth behind her wealth would explode into one of New York's biggest scandals. Not long after she had moved to New York in 1885, Hannah had been visited by John R. Platt. At the time, he was a well-to-do New York businessman in his mid-60s. Born in 1820, he had made his money selling plate glass. This first visit soon turned into a more frequent liaison after Platt came across Elias again in Manhattan in 1887. Long before cell phones or modern communication, when the women in the Tenderloin district often moved to avoid police raids, Hannah and her lover found a secret way to stay in touch, as did many others. Using the names Bessie and Popper, they placed coded ads in the classified section of a New York newspaper, messages that revealed where they'd be each night. And Hannah and John's nights weren't just a brief fling. Their secret affair would go on for years. John Platt was a married man, and a well-known figure in New York. Discretion was essential, and he valued the fact that Hannah was very secretive. Platt soon began giving her money. Lots of it. Later accounts suggest he began giving her between $2,000 and $6,000 per month, the equivalent of between $70,000 and $210,000 in today's money. He also advised her about using the money to buy properties and stocks. It wasn't long before she was wealthy, eventually becoming one of the wealthiest women in the world, perhaps the single richest black woman in the United States. One of Hannah's early investments, guided by John Platt, was a house near his family home where she began renting rooms. One night in 1895, Platt came to visit. A tenant, Cornelius Williams, a black man living there at the time, answered the door, irritated. When Platt, using his alias Mr. Green, asked if the folks were in, Williams slammed the door in his face. He later asked a servant who the man was, and she told him it was a Mr. Green. A few weeks later, Elias kicked Williams out of the house. He had become obsessed with her, and the eviction hit him hard. Convinced that the mysterious Mr. Green was to blame, he left furious and swore he'd get revenge. 8 years later, on a cold November afternoon in 1903, Andrew Haswell Green, the quiet genius behind Central Park and the New York Public Library, was returning home after a family lunch. As he approached his front steps, Cornelius Williams was waiting, paranoid, delusional, and still obsessed. Mistaking Green for Platt, Williams pulled out a revolver and fired. Green fell where he stood, never knowing he'd become the tragic casualty of a vendetta that had nothing to do with him. Cornelius Williams was later tried, declared insane, and spent the remainder of his life in an insane asylum. Back in 1890, Hannah had married an African-American rail worker named Christopher Smith, but despite this marriage, her relationship with Platt went on. Smith eventually left in 1897, claiming that he found his wife's relationship with Platt intolerable. To keep Smith quiet, John secretly paid off the legal trouble behind the scenes, and then gave Hannah even more money to make sure it all stayed buried. By then, Platt's own wife had passed away, and he wasted no time in purchasing Hannah a fine townhouse near Central Park so he could see her more often. But as the years passed, Platt grew uneasy. Guilt, greed, or fear, something twisted inside him, and when he finally snapped, their passionate secret romance would explode into one of the wildest scandals New York had ever seen. Hannah's relationship with Platt would hardly be known about today were it not for the extraordinary events that began in the summer of 1904. At that time, Platt took legal action against Hannah, accusing her of extorting a massive sum from him over the years to keep quiet about his first visit to her. Over time, the amount of money involved had become staggering. Platt claimed that in total, Hannah had blackmailed him out of just over $685,000. Calculating the historical value of money can be tricky, especially over long periods with changing economies. Still, we can conclude that the amount in this case is roughly equivalent to $30 million today. The sheer amount of money caught the attention of New Yorkers, and for months, newspapers eagerly reported every twist and turn of the case. Platt offered a colourful excuse for how he first got involved with Elias. He insisted that he hadn't gone to see her as a woman of pleasure. No, according to him, it all started back in the late 1880s when he supposedly wandered into a massage parlour she ran, just looking for relief from a bad case of rheumatism, not for anything more intimate. He then claimed that he visited her again in the 1890s and began helping her financially to set up a boarding house. Then, according to poor Platt, he had become the unwitting victim of her maliciousness. Hannah, he claimed, had started blackmailing him. If he didn't continue to give her large sums of money, she would go to his family and claim that for many years he had been visiting her for nights of passion. Platt was a prominent member of New York's business community, and the police took his claims seriously. Hannah wouldn't play ball though. When the police first approached her, she refused to come in for questioning. They then invaded her townhouse and seized anything they could find which they thought might be connected to the case. She was taken to the Tombs prison in Lower Manhattan, a notoriously grim and unwelcoming place. Hannah spent several tense days behind the cold walls of the prison, but then, in a stunning twist, she was suddenly released. Investigators concluded that there was no evidence to support his claim that Hannah had blackmailed him. Despite the staggering sums involved, it turned out Platt had handed over the money willingly, year after year. In the weeks that followed, it became evident that Platt had only launched the case half-heartedly. The real pressure came from his family. Once they discovered the fortune he had quietly given away, panic set in. What they thought would be a massive inheritance had all but vanished, and they wanted someone to blame. After Platt withdrew the charges, once police found nothing to support them, his family took matters into their own hands, dragging Hannah into civil court to claw back the money. But just like before, they came up empty. By early 1905, the story began to fizzle out, and Hannah was exonerated. The entire episode had been a strange one that demonstrated the racial politics of New York at the start of the 20th century. For instance, the papers as they covered the story seemed to be more interested in Hannah's racial background than the case itself, and some of them even came up with the idea that she was a foreign-born woman. The mid-1900s was the peak of European migration to New York, and the sensationalist headlines about a foreign prostitute swindling a helpless 80-year-old man spread like wildfire. The scandal revealed the city's deep fears and suspicions about the rising tide of newcomers shaking up their world. Hannah remained in New York for many years. She lived off the rent from the many properties she owned in Harlem, and eventually she moved to Uptown Manhattan herself, where she could live with greater anonymity after the unwanted fame she'd acquired back in 1904. Platt died in 1908 and left behind an estate valued at $10,000, around $350,000 today, a meagre sum in comparison to his once grand fortune. Unsurprisingly, none of it was left to Hannah, and she did not attend the funeral. In the 1910s, she was involved in various land transactions in Harlem as the neighborhood started to develop as a haven for well-to-do African Americans in the advance of the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s. Hannah saw little of this explosion of African American culture in the region though. In 1923, exhausted by her lingering infamy in New York, and perhaps in order to avoid several lawsuits over her dubious financial past, she decided to leave altogether. She and her butler, a Japanese man named Kato, boarded a ship for Europe and never returned. Hannah then settled in France. What happened thereafter is a source of myth. One story has it that she died in Paris. Another claims she passed away in luxury on the French Riviera in the late 1920s. It was a colourful end to a colourful life. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Hannah Elias. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments. And if you have any suggestions, also let me know down below in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.